Okay. 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 I just wanted to add another point in the Mitzvas Sotah. The Ramban in Shiur Aleph says that there's a machlokes tanoim about Sotah and the nafkamina minyan mitzvahs. I'll read to you what he says. And the Miri says something similar also. Why is in Mesupaga the minion of Tar, that there's a minion of Taryag? Minesha Motzino Machlekes B'Gemara B'Psukim Rabim Im Hein Mitzvah or Reshus Mehem Mashom M'Seches Sotah V'Kines Ishtoi. This part of V'Kines Ishtoi Divrei Rabbi Yishmael Reshus Rabbi Akiva Omer Chayva. So what the Ramban says is that whether V'Kines Ishta is Reshus Chayva is a nafkamina minyan mitzvahs. That according to Rabbi Akiva, who says it's Chayva, there is another mitzvah, and according to Rabbi Yishmael, it's not. The Miri, this is a Gemara in Sotah Gimel and Aleph. The sign of V'Kines Ishtoi, Reshus, Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva Imachayv. The Miri also seems to go like that, because the Miri in Daf Gimel in Sotah says, Riyim Psak, Eina Midashov of Kulam. El V'Kines Ishtoi, Halocha Shi Reshus, She'ein Akinu Mitzvah Min HaTorah, Ela Midivrei Seifim, Kmo Shibianu. V'Ika Mitzvah Hi, Shekoshi Kane Vistate, then she becomes awesome, whatever. So he says, Lamaisa, we paskin that V'Kine is Chayva, so you have a new mitzvah in your mitzvahs. The interesting thing is the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchos Ishus, he's of the opinion that V'Kine is not Reshus, but Chayva. The Rambam in Perek Tezvov of Hilchos Ishus, Halacha Yud Zayin, V'Chayva Akol Ish L'Kanos L'Ishtoi. Omer Chacham Me'ein Odom Mekane L'Ishtoi Elim Kein Nichnesoi Beruach Ta'ar. So that's Chayva. On the other hand, the Ram says in Perek Daled of Hilchos Sotah, Halacha Yudches, Mitzvas Chachomim al Bnei Yisrael L'Kanus L'Sheim Shenema V'Kines Ishtoi. So, on one hand, he seems to be paskening Chayva, which is Rabbi Yeshua. On the other hand, he has the word Mitzvah Chachomim. And I checked out the word Mitzvah Chachomim in Mishnah Torah, and to the best of my abilities, it seems to be the Rabbanon. And the first case he mentions in Perek Vav was Brachas Halacha Beis, and he's talking about Mitzvah Chachomim, but Netilas Yadayim, which is the Rabbanon. So the question is, on one hand, the Ram seems to say it's the Rabbanon if you take Mitzvah Chacham seriously. On the other hand, the Gemara in Sotah is clearly mashma, something like the Ramban and the Miri, because the simple reading of the Gemara in Sotah, you get the impression there's a deraisa dik nafkamina. How do I know that? Because the Gemara on Gimel and Aleph, talking about the Machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael, says Omalei Hocha Bikro Pligi. So the Gemara seems to say it's a Machlokes how you interpret Psukim. If it's a Machlokes Bikroi, it's not a D'Rabbanan l'chayr. Well, it's a D'Oraisa. Now, I just want to try to attack the problem. First of all, the idea, at least in the Rambam's frame of reference, to imagine that there's a mitzvah called V'kines Ishtoi seems to be very odd or almost impossible. I'll explain to you why I say that. Because you look at the pasuk in Nosai, it goes like this. V'over lov ruach kino, v'kines ishtoi, v'hi nitmo'o, oy over lov ruach kino. And it's all over v'kines ishtoi. So if you look at the pasuk is telling you a story. V'kines ishtoi, there are two scenarios. One scenario was nitma, one scenario was lo nitma. But v'kines ishtoi is not a tzivui in Pshuto Shel Mikra, but it's a story leading up to the parsha of Sotah, of the way it plays itself out. That the Baal brings the Isha to the Kohen, and the Megillah, Mechikas Megillah, the Minchas Knos, v'chulei v'chulei. So to say and imagine, according to the Rambam, there should have been a new mitzvah, minyan mitzvahs, that l'chayr is impossible, because since the Ram says in Shiur Shmini that minyan mitzvahs is a minyan of tzivuyim, that a mitzvah is an imperative, and over here, the word v'kine is not an imperative at all. It's a descriptive verb of something happening in the past. If this happens,
You're
then...
up.
Yeah.
You were sleeping.
What? What?
No, I just muted somebody.
Okay. So if this happens, excuse me, sorry. So you're in a position, according to the Rambam, that to imagine minyan mitzvahs, that this should be a mitzvah and a minyan l'chayr is impossible, because there's no command. And we don't understand what it means. So what does it mean? There's a tzivui, but there's no tzivui. So what does it mean, chayva? And you can ask the question the Rambam in Hilchos Ishus, but you don't know. He doesn't quote the pasuk there. He quotes the Mitzvah Chachamim in Hilchos Sotah. So I think in the Rambam's frame of reference, the best you can do is imagine the Gemara Sotah, if it's a nafkamina deraisa, and the other hand, it's not pshuta shel mikra, and l'chayr it's not a pirush makubal. I don't know if there could be machlokes about it, especially. So it's tam a drash. It's a drasha. You'd give them midas, or midas a third drashes ben. But the Ram Shita in Shiur Sheni, and is that a mitzvahs are either pshuta shel mikra, teresh b'ksav, or a pirush makubal. So here, the Rambam and the Rambam's favorite reference, this could not be a mitzvah min minyan. And the best mitzvah could be is maybe it's the drasha. but it's not mafurish and kha. It's not pshuta shel mikra. I'm also want to add another. So I'm not sure if the Rambam, and I could have imagined, B'noisel is there. I could have imagined if everything I said is wrong. Okay. The question is, what would you do over here? There would be a separate mitzvah in minyan a mitzvah of kines ishtoi, or would have been the part the same way the mitzvah is the seder of Sotah, that the Megillah, the Hashkot, the Mechikar Hamayim, v'chulei. So I would imagine Kines Ishto is part of that general seder. So no, how you cut it? You want to make it into a tzivui? I couldn't imagine it's another mitzvah. It's not every time you have machlokes with Rishus Chayva. What it's meaning. The question is it part of the seder parsha in terms of tzivuyim, or it's just a story which leads up to the parsha? But there might not be enough Geminim mitzvah at all. I just like to have, so I thought all this was a very interesting postscript in this. I'd like to add one other thing. I found it interesting. I'm not sure exactly what it means. If you would be coming and trying to take on the position of Akiva, Rabbi Akiva or Mechayva, V'kines Ishtoi, Rabbi Akiva or Mechayva, so where would you put the halacha? I would have put it in L'Halkos HaReshaim together with Mitzvas Chachamim. Isn't it a little odd that the V'kines Ishtoi is not in L'Halkos HaReshaim, the Chayva, V'kines Ishtoi Chayva, but it's in L'Halkos Ishus. And it starts like this. V'chayva, you just look at the general flow of things. So you see, he ends off in Halacha Tezayin, the Dinei Puruvu, and the Perek Tezvav, Halacha Tezaf, Api Shekim, Odin Kibitz Kli Rivya, how who Mitzu, Midivay Seifim, Shala Yevatim, Elifos, Ribois, calls man Sheish Bakayach. Shkol Moist Nefshach in Yisrael, Kilu Bono Olam, V'chei Mitzvas Chachamim, he, Shalo Yeshiv Odom, B'lo Yisha, Shalo V'dehiro, B'lo Yiseish Isha, B'lo Ish, Shalo Techsh. Okay. Mitzvas Chachamim. Then he says, V'chayva, I'll call Halacha Yud Zayin, V'chayva I'll call Ish, L'kanis Ishtoi. Okay. So I would have said that Chayva also is Mitzvas Chachamim. And then he goes on. Yud Ches, V'chein Tzivu Chachamim, Alo Ish Tiyet Tznu B'tech Beisa, V'loi Tal B'tzchoik, Kalos Rosh, B'fnei Ba'alo, V'loi Titma V'chule. Halacha Yud Tes. V'chein Tzivu Chachamim, Shiyeh Odom B'chabed Es Ishto Yosem Migufay. Chof, V'chein Tzivu Chachamim, Alo Ish Tiyeh Mechabed Es Baila, V'yosem Midai. So l'cheira, I'm not interested in just in where the Rambam, just that you see again the idea that it's mitzvahs chachamim, whether this is actually a deraisa, which is not mafurish and kol, a drosha, or it's a poshet the rabbanon, which would have assumed from the context of chen tzivu chachamim. And all the other places in Mishnah Torah, But I just think it's very interesting that the Rambam quotes the idea that it's chayva, he quotes in Hilchos Ishus. And you understand yourself, it's the dina and the Mitzvas Sotah, it's a Mitzvas Sotah. L'cheira, it's the place for it is not in the Hilchos Ishus, but only in Hilchos Sotah. He quotes it both in Hilchos Sotah at the end and here in Hilchos Ishus. And look, you get the impression that he has kilo both aspects. He quotes Sim Rachamim that for Ruach Tara v'Kina Tech Beisai, and that's the Medina Sotah. And then the eitzes of Shalom Bayis, one after the next, after the next. That how to have proper conduct, how the Baal should mechaved his wife, the wife mechaved the Chal, how she acts and how he acts, and it basically is a course in what they call now in modern days hadrochas chos v'kala. But that's what he's doing, and l'cheira, it's if it would be kilo a dreisa the gedin Sotah, it's not its place. L'cheira is not in Hilchos Ishus, but okay, that's one point that I wanted to add. Truth is, I would have flipped this around, and I think the Kashas and the Ramban, he actually, or maybe it's the Ramban the Shitas, it's only a drasha, but the Pshuta Shel Mikra is only a story, and Kilu, and there's Rabbi Yish, but Kilu learns Kilu is the Tzibui also in the drasha. It's a very odd thing, because, and even if it's a tzivui, l'cheira, it should be part of the Seder Parsha, and that the Ramban should mechadish over a new mitzvah is a big chiddush. The Meir also like that. You see, sometimes you ask a kasha, you give a teretz, never, there's nothing, so you're stuck. What can I tell you? So it's not a teretz. It's what they call in Yiddish, mikrich men arois. But over here, it's much. I don't see the question in the first place, because to interpret that Rabbi Akiva means a separate mitzvah minyan mitzvahs, when Pshuta Shel Mikra, it's not a tzivui, and Kilu interpreting that in the Deraisa level, the Dras to make it a tzivui, and that should be a separate mitzvah, as opposed to say there's a big chiddush. Now, one more postscript on Sotah, and then we'll move on. If you'd ask me, who is the mitzvah on? So, I would tell you that it's a sharano, it's religious law, as the Ram says, and if there's a v'kine or whatever, the Baal has to bring the isha to the kohen, okay, and maybe the key whatever before, but afterwards the mitzvah's on the kohen. So it's both, I would say. The chinuch there's a very interesting thing. The chinuch says in mitzvah shin samachay, mitzvas sotah sheyivi'eh or habal sheyivi'eh habal el hakohen v'ya'aseh lo k'mishpat hakosu. So l'cheir, what it is, he's saying it's a conglomerate. The Baal brings to the kohen, and then it goes on the and then it goes in the kohen. In the Rambam, I just want to be mean akotze. I'm not sure when the mitzvah starts, because the Rambam in akotze says la'aseh l'Sotah kiseroso, as it's written in the Torah. You should do to the Sotah as it's written in Chenema, v'oso lo hakein es kol haterazes. So maybe, according to the Rambam, the mitzvah starts in the kohen. It's a very interesting lashon in the Minyan HaKotzer. I'm going to say something. I like to think about it before. I'm just going to say something, and I'm not even sure what I'm saying. The Ram says the Mitzvas Sotah is a shrana, is religious law. And l'chayr, according to Minchas Chinuch, there's no kiyum. And if you recall, we had mitzvahs which were part that there was a kiyum, like the case of Motzi Shemra, that the Malchus and the Lishoy Ishtay is a mitzvah, and maybe the Knas is only a shrana. Okay. So this whole issue we were talking about before about the kines ishtay, just imagine, do you imagine is a kiyum in it? It's only part of the shrana. If it would be a deraisa, not, I'm just saying it's basically polemics. We know nothing. But I thought that just to begin to think about it might be an interesting thing, but I have nothing much to say at the moment. Now, on to the next mitzvah. HaMitzvah v'arba v'esrim u'masayim. Hi shetzivonu lahakes b'ritzua es ha'oivrim al mitzvos miyuchodes. Okay. So the Rambam uses the word ritzua or shoit or whatever it is, both here and also in Cherish Yadalid. It's true, he's describing the instrument which is used to Mekayim the mitzvah, but as far as we're concerned, in Minyan HaMitzvos, it doesn't make a difference. L'chayra, it's only prote mitzvahs, and there's no reason to mention it both here and there. So I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's not a mistake. I'm just not sure. L'Halkos HaReshaim, I don't know. Es ha'ivrim al mitzvahs miyuchodos or misiyamos, and specific mitzvahs. V'amrei yis'aleh v'pilu ha'shofet v'hikohu. And the shofet throws him down v'hikohu. So how do we know that there's a mitzvah? So that is very simple. It says v'pilo hashofet, and that's at tzibur. the pilo, the kol. That's what we have. So I would have said, this I'm not sure about. You see, the dinim, we'll see later that how to stand the person who was getting malchus and what position should be. But I'm not sure at all if this, the pilo hashefet, might be a hakdoma, as the Ram points out in Shirish Yud. Even though it's hakdoma fush b'teira, it's not in the minyan mitzvah. This is only hakdoma, and the mitzvah is the vikol. That's what I imagined. So, l'chayra, there's a mitzvah minyan, l'chayra is not a problem. Unless you take the position, which is certainly possible to take the position, you can take the position that mitzvahs are tzivuyim, or what we should be doing, to get, let's say, olam haba, we shouldn't be doing in order to get oinshim. But the mitzvahs are not oinshim. See, even though there's a tzivuy, there wouldn't be a mitzvah. Which my impression is Ramban in Shirish Yudalit claims that is what the L'Halkos HaReshaim seems to say. But the Rambam doesn't seem to be arguing about that, because he assumes, see the polemics. Let's just go back. The Rambam is having polemics in Yudalit, and the clear assumption of those polemics are that there is a mitzvah of oinshim. The question is, how do you count? How many times do you count the mitzvah? Do you count the malchus of each individual, the malchus of shatnez, the malchus of basa b'cholov, the malchus of behemoth tmeya, or whatever the situation happens to be, is a separate mitzvah, or you count the type of oynish as a separate mitzvah. And the polemics that he's having in Shirish Yudalit is probably of Haigain, because of Haigain counts each different case of Mises Bezdin as a separate mitzvah. Besides the Ashora itself, he counts the Oynish as a mitzvah. So the issue of do you count Oinshim or don't you count Oinshim was not on the table in Shirish Yudalit. The Ramban says that in terms of counting Oinshim in minyan mitzvahs, in that issue, he would take the Rambam's perspective. Because Misas Bezdin, maybe you say, it's not a mitzvah, it's just an onus for the Aveira, and the Aveira counted. However, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Lamed Hamed Beis, and the Gemara in Yevomis, I think Yevomis Beis, talks about the issue of maybe you should say, Aseh Dechalois Aseh, and that you should have Oinshim Bezdin on Shabbos. So l'chayra, it's a chaya. If you say Aseh Dechalois Aseh, means there's a mitzvah say. And both the Ram and the Ramban are taking this point of view, taking this perspective, that you can't have Aseh Dechaloiseh unless you have a mitzvah and a minyan. So the Gemara is ready to say Aseh Dechaloiseh. It means Einshe Bezdin al mitzvah. So once Einshe Bezdin mitzvah, the shaila is how you count them. Do you count all of each case of skila separately, or you count all the cases skila as one, or you count all Mitzvas Bezdin as one, which Ramban is going through the opinion, which we'll see. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but these are the options. However, when it comes to Malchus, once it's clear that Einshe Minyan HaMitzvos, l'cheira, then Malchus is certainly a mitzvah because it's tzivui, and Einshe tzivui to do this Einshe. So l'cheira, it's certainly a Minyan HaMitzvos. I don't think anyone denies that. However, the Ram does something which a priori is beyond the pale. And the Ramban takes him to task for it. And it's difficult to imagine what exactly the Ram had in mind. He is arguing against Rav Sadigan. Rav Sadigan counts each Mitzvas Bezdin as a separate mitzvah. So the Ram says, if you're going to take this position, then you should count each individual case. Each individual case of Malchus also a separate mitzvah. And you'll end up with hundreds of mitzvahs because, Malchus for Shabbos, Malchus for Basar V'Cholim, Malchus for Behemoth Tmeya, Malchus for Achilas Giranosha, etc., etc., etc. And he goes through in Perek Yutes Halacha Daled lists all the Chayvei Malchus. So this, from the Ram's perspective, this kasha is also it borders on the ridiculous. Excuse me, just from the Ram's perspective. Since mitzvah minyan mitzvah is a Torah shebiksav, and there's no the Malchus of Shatnez doesn't say in the Torah. It's only after all the drush dumi the chesima that you have various Malchus. But to count each individual Malchus as a separate mitzvah is beyond the pale. So anyone doing that, I don't know what should happen to them. That should be a proof where the Torah has in each individual case of Mitzvas Bezdin a separate tzibui to do the Mitzvas Bezdin, whether it's chenek or whatever it happens to be. You can compare the two. And at the Ramban is, he doesn't understand the Ram's comparison, and that l'chayra is a pel. So l'chayra, that Malchus is one mitzvah is a double portion, and then it's a mitzvah minyan mitzvah is also double portion, because the tzivui, and if Mitzvas Bezdin are mitzvah minyan mitzvahs, l'chayra Malchus also should be. Let's leave it like that. However, if I would have asked the Ram's kasha, I would have asked it a different way. Because he goes to me and he starts counting, it's multiple. I would tell you that if I would have been the Ram's seat and trying to bring a proof, I would say the following. that there are 3 times in the Torah there's a mitzvah malchus. It's not only v'hipilu hashofet v'kol, but twice it says in the Torah v'yisroisai. It says once by Ben Serumeira, which is malchus, and it says once in Motzi Shemra, which is also malchus. And I pointed out, whether it's part of the mitzvah of Motzi Shemra or not, but Lamaisa, the Rambam, in the Minyan HaLoikin, he counts as 2 separate cases in Minyan HaLoikin. He counts the 2 cases of Yisrael. He counts Motzi Shemra and Ben Serumeira. So I could imagine counting all 3, but since I say they're all the cases of Ein Shema 1, therefore I count them. Therefore I count it as 1. We'll come back and talk about this, but I just want to flip things around. The Ramban, just to give you an idea, I'm not sure how far we'll get or whatever it is, but I think this is interesting. The Ramban starts off Sherish Yudalid with an amazingly interesting question on the Rambam. The Rambam claims that you count the different types of Einshin. So Ramban asks, just because it's a repetition of the performance, but it's in a different context, does that mean that it's one mitzvah? Do we count the shvisa of each individual yontif as one, or we count it as the number, the different types of Yom Tovim? Do we count the mitzvah of Shvisa by Shabbos and Yom Kippur as 1 or 2? It's basically the same type of Shvisa, Shabbos and Yom Kippur. He asks, do we count Tkiyah Shefa of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur of Yovel as 1 or 2? There the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs itself asked the question, remember, that the Rambam claims that it's 2 in Yonah. And then he says, do you count the mitzvah of Shvisa of Shemitah and Yovel as 1 or 2, and it's all the same? This I don't understand. I'm just going to throw something out. I'm just going to I'm sure that it's going to just, it might shake you up, but I don't want to talk about this now. To the best of my knowledge, there's no mitzvah of Shvisa and Yovel. The Ram happens to say in Sefer HaMitzvos that the Kiddashtem Yemekayim, the mitzvah of Kiddush HaYovel through Shvisa, but it's not a mitzvah Shvisa. So I'm not sure what the Ramban means. But whatever it is, he's taking a position that the fact something repeated many times doesn't make it one mitzvah. C says logically, either you should count each individual case of Mises Bezdin as a separate mitzvah, as Rav Sadi Goin does, or you come up with an umbrella mitzvah called to Mevayir that really is the umbrella mitzvah of all Mises Bezdin. And that's the position he takes. Okay. But Rabbi Sai, when you talk about the That only helps you in Mrs. Bezdin. But it doesn't help my Malchus, does it? So Bishlam, according to the Rambam, that you count Einshim and the Einish is repeated, so you count in only one. V'yisroi side. So I understand. But according to the Ramban, you should count it here as 3. I have an idea, but I'm not going to mention it now. And I think it might require a little more careful reading of the Ramban and Sherish Yudal. So look it over and think about the question. Okay, let's go on. Now, so if you look at this parsha, the Pilu HaShefet V'Kol is prefaced by a discussion Ki Yeriv Bein Anoshim. There was a fight about something, and it's because a tzaddik, the Shisharosha, Boyim bin Akosarosha, the Pil HaShefet, the Kol. So it's a very peculiar case. How does this become the Mitzvah Sotah for all different types of Malchus? So, frankly, I'm not bothered by it that much, and just let's get started like this, and then we'll go on. I'll try to dissect it a little more. For example, let's go over here. The mitzvah Leish Chavov. Hishivon L'Harig es Oivrim Al Ksas HaMitzvos B'Sayif. The mitzvah Sayif, Chereb Sayif. V'Omer Yis'ala Nokom Yinokim. The Pasuk Rabbi say Nokom Yinokim was followed by a call, was formulated by a call from an Eved. So the Pasuk was said in a very peculiar case. So how is this the mitzvah of Sayif? So Ram the Shita say that Oinshin you count according to the type of Einish. So the type of Einish of Sayif is the same in all the cases. But the Torah has many singular tzivuyim in specific cases by all the specific cases of Sayif. So what's the overriding principle according to the Rambam? You take one of these specific cases and you make them the mitzvah. And it doesn't make a difference which one, because they're all the same. So once you look in that perspective, so then you have no problem over here also. V'Pil HaShefet V'Kol, that there might have been many different cases, or there's a specific case that the Torah is talking about, but since all the Einshim of Malchus are the same min and sug, so this could be the tzivui for everything. In the Rambam's reference, it's not difficult at all. And this happens to be, even though it's a very peculiar case, and it's very clear, this is the mitzvah from all the cases. L'Halkos HaReshaim Ritzu es ha'ovrim al mitzvos miuchados and mitzvos. All the mitzvahs, all the loisas the asholos, which are chayiv malchus, v'oma yisaleh, v'pil ha'shofet, v'kol. The posik nokom yinokem, it says like this: "V'chiyaki ish es abdoi, oy es amosoi b'shevet umeis tachas yodoi, nokom yinokem." And that's the mitzvah, as I read it before. But even though you could have done this, and it sounds very nice according to the Rambam, in my opinion, this is all not necessary. Because the Matiki Hashmua, and we'll get back to how it might go into Pshutai, Mit Hashem, later, but the Matiki Hashmua learned that this pasuk refers to all Chayvei Malchus. V'pil lefon v'kol. And the Ramban clearly makes that statement in Chumash. In Dvorim Chavhei Pasuk Aleph v'maskiyuriv ben anoshim al derech kabolas abuseinu she'amalchus hu b'chayvei halavim, and that's what we're talking about. So it means any case of lav, of any lav shedoim lechsima, if it's doim lav lechsima, the Matiki Hashmua says this pasuk applies, and that is all the whole sugi. Look at you, Gimel Beis. That's what's going on. The Gemara's discussion of Yishmael. And not only do you learn all the cases that they're malchus from this pasuk, so you don't need this binyan av that there's a specific pasuk and you apply it to all the oinshim because it's the same sug oinish, as we said by Mrs. Besden. But this pasuk itself, the Matiki Hashmua have it by all the cases of malchus, and that in fact the Mishnah Malchus in Per Gimel Mishnah Yud Gimel Yod Tefach Ulchova Tefach. It's talking about the Rotzeach. V'roishem agas al pi kreisai u'maka oisai shlish milefonov u'shtei yodas ma'achov v'eino maka oisai lo yoimed v'lo yoshev ela moite shenemar v'hipilu ha'shofet v'amake make b'yoda achas b'chol koichai. So the learning out the dinim of all malchus v'hipil ha'shofet, and we learn other dinim of malchus. The Gemara in Chav Gimel and Aleph malchus, also Sefer Sotah, Kiyetze b'dov ha'toim v'hipil ha'shofet v'kol yochel ha'shofet atzmoi hoya makeh. I say maybe the shofet is the makeh. Hamaloi v'kol lefonov acher hoya makeh lo ha'shofet. So once the Matiki Hashmua says that it applies to all Chayvei Lavim, it's a very simple thing to say that this is the mitzvah, and the Matiki Hashmua says that it applies to all cases, and this is the mitzvah. The Ramban himself clearly says in Shiur Yudalit, the Ramban says, Aval HaMalchus ein dimyonoi le'ela dimin yofa. The Rambam made a mistake to compare Malchus to Mrs. Bezdin. L'fi shelo nitztavinu al hamalkios b'chol aver b'fnei. There's no separate sivui by each individual case of Malchus. Avol sivonu yis'ale mitzvah klolis acher halavim kulon shenilke al kol lav doim lav dechsimo. That's the pshat in the Aseh. There's a tzivui for all cases of doim lav dechsimo. K'moi shebo beferish hamakubo ubegolim and akosav oid leibo malchus elishtei mitzvos shimhoyim. And he says it's pshuta shomikra. That's what he's talking about. Hoye bin HaKos HaReshaim she'apilu ha'shefe v'kol lefonov arboim. And then there's a lav lo yosef. Ulechein, this is Torah shebiksav. Exactly what I was telling you before. So we don't understand b'chlal what the Rambam equates Malchus to Mrs. Bezdin as a proof to something. Okay. Now, I think there's not that much negate to us. I'll just give you a ma'amokah and discuss it briefly. The Ramban, I think in Pshuta Shomikra and Chumash, is bothered why the Torah says the case of Malchus in such an odd case. He says like this, Al derech kabbalas avosenu, it's talking about all chumim Malchus. Ma'in lo beriv, what's do with a riv ben anoshim? Asher ben shnei anoshim, hoichel nevele bebeisei like v'chein azoreh sadeu, o kamo klayim, v'abo achas me'anoshim asuris b'lav, v'chol shar lavim, v'oid, ma'tam b'tzikas hatzadik, l'ficha dosho be'edim zoymemen. So he talks about edim zoymemen, and that's v'tikas harosha, because they're having a riv, who's right, who's saying shekel, who not. And then he says maybe it's talking about a different case of our core pockets mishavaputi. Look at the Ramban and Chumash. Whatever it is, that really is not the gate to us, because the issue is once the Matiki Ashmur says it applies to everything, so this is clearly a tzibri on everything. Okay. Now, Derech Agav, what I mentioned before, in Perek Yutes Halacha Daled, that Ben Seru Moira and Moti Shemra are in the Minyan Aloikin, he Kuf Lamed Beis, Ben Seru Moira, Be'edus Rishona, is Malchus, and that's the Malchus of Oynish of Lavan, as he says in Befush, in Perek Yudaled, in Perek Yutes Halacha Daled, and Kuf Lamed Gimel, Hamoitzi Shemra Shenimsed Dvoroi Sheker. Okay, now you should just know, as I mentioned, Rav Sadi Goin counts all them in Perek Yud Ches. We don't have all of them, but he counts all cases of Mrs. Bezdin as separate mitzvahs. But Malchus, even according to Rav Sadi Goin, Malchus is only one mitzvah. And that's what you expected. Now, then he says the following: V'hine nilmois b'zochrenu mitzvos loisaseh al oisana mitzvos she's chai v'oiva alei malchus. That he says he's going to do, and he gives the list in Perek Yud Tes, Halacha Daled Hilchos Sanhedrin. Ukfa his boy mishpli mitzvah zo Meseches Malchus. Now, just want to introduce the next mitzvah. Mitzvah Reish Chafei. But mitzvah Reish Chafei is the mitzvah of Golus, which is we'll have to see what it is exactly. It says Hish Zivono, and Tibet says Lahitzi Make Nefesh Bishkogo Meiroi Liir Mikot Oma Yisale V'Yoshev Shom Ad Mois HaKoyin HaGodol. So I just want to introduce to you, there's something very interesting happening over here. Because you look at the word Sivonu, the Targum says that it's not the Targum, the Arabic text says that it's Amal. So means it's Sibri Muchot. Interesting is in Shirish Shvi, you look, we talks about Paulus. He's dealing with different issue. Maybe it should be 16 mitzvahs. Maybe it should be one mitzvah, many different permutations or expressions of the mitzvah. There he calls it a shrana. The question is the stira. What exactly is the mitzvah? The question is, who is the mitzvah on? Let's get to you. Maki nefesh b'shkogo me'iro li'iro mikot v'omo yis'ale v'yoshev shom ad mois hakoyin hagodol. So I'd like you to check out, open up your chumash, and check out if there is such a pasuk. Okay. Now, then it says, just to get into it. Then it says v'loshet sifri. So the Ram's quoting is Sifri. Vayoshev Shom Eino Yoitze Mishom Liolam Shnem Shom Shom Tehei Dirosai Shom Tehei Misosai Shom Tehei Kvosai. Should I challenge you to find such a Sifri? Okay. So the question is, again, is this an Amar or a Shirano? What is the difference, or is there a difference? What is the pasuk that's the makor of the mitzvah? Is there such a pasuk by Yoshev Shom ad mois hakoyin hagodol? Truth is, he quotes the same pasuk in Min HaKotzer, and then he quotes a Sifri, which I challenge you to find it, and we'll talk about what that actually means. Then, afterwards, we'll go through the Daled Mises Bezdin, Neder, and we'll take off the Ram and the Ramban in Sherish Yudaled, just to review it. If I didn't talk about it, I didn't talk about it. Okay. The Shem next week, Neder.